for everyone who is here, thank you for being here. Nick and I are both going to be presenting for you beginning at the top of the hour. Nick's going to go first. He'll present for 20, 25 minutes, and he's going to be talking about his writing process. And the dude has written 184 weeks in a row and has never missed a week, which is just an amazing achievement when it comes to just putting in the reps. And we're going to talk about that. And then after Nick talks about his process, I have spent so many hours of my life grilling Nick on how he's done this and just asking him question after question after question. And so I probably am more familiar with Nick's rise to success than any other writer online. And so I have a presentation about Nick's story and how I factor into that. And then Nick is actually going to walk through the different checkpoints. And we're going to start where you might be feeling, hey, I have a loud screaming voice that I really want to get out into the world and I want to start writing, but I don't know how. And I'm scared that I'm going to post online and no one's going to read my stuff. And I'm also scared that I'm going to post online and everyone's going to judge me. And you're scared of both of those things, even though they both can't be true, that no one's going to read your stuff and everyone's going to judge you. But that's how we feel as new writers. And then for some of you, you might now have some traction. You might have posted 20 weeks in a row, but maybe you're not growing as fast as you want. Maybe you are growing fast, but you know what? You're not really thrilled with what you're writing about. So that's what my presentation is really going to be focused on. And basically, as I continue here, as we go into these introductions, if all of you could just look at the bottom of your screen right now, you'll see a Q&A, you'll see a chat. So if you have questions for us, Anna, who will introduce herself in a second, she's going to be monitoring the Q&A. And towards the end, we're going to spend 30 minutes on that. At certain times, I'll ask Anna to pitch in because she's doing such a good job growing her audience. And so she's going to have certain ideas around how she's been growing hers. She's in the early stages and we've been working together, and she'll talk about that in a little. And so if you have questions for us, post them in the Q&A. If you just have comments, things that are exciting to you, post them in the chat. So right now, let's test the chat. And if all of you could write in where in the world you're writing from. So I'm here in San Francisco right now, and write in that chat, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Dallas. Thank you. Tokyo.
Oh,
This is always really cool. India, Saudi Arabia.
Just in New York, they're all cheering right now. They're all clapping, by the way. Just want to throw that out there. So
Sydney, Germany, Sweden. So for all of you who are in Europe, thank you for staying up. For all of you who are in India, thank you for waking up early. We really appreciate it. It's always a blast to see so many people on these. So what I'm going to do first, before Nick introduces himself, I'm going to ask my team, Becca and Anna, to introduce themselves. So Becca is my assistant. She rocks, and she is going to be taking notes for all of you so that we can send them to you after the workshop is over. Becca, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Becca. I'll be taking the notes, so you probably won't hear a whole lot from me through this. Take a look. Those will be in your inbox tomorrow. I'm just so excited to hear what these guys have to say. I'm a musician, which right now that's a tough thing to be. It's a lot more exciting to be looking at writing. So I might steal some of these hints.
Awesome. And then Anna, why don't you introduce yourself and say where you're from, what you're up to, and then tell them a little bit about what we're working on as it pertains to summer camp.
Yeah, I'm Anna. I'm from Panama, and I'm a former elementary school teacher, now an edupreneur, and I'm kind of doing a deep dive into some of the most challenging questions that we face today in education and that pertain to learning. And I met David through Rite of Passage. I was an alum of third and fourth cohort. And we realized that we share a lot of our views of education, especially how children learn. And what we've been doing is just taking everything that we collectively know about what it takes to learn and how to engage kids in creative experiences. And we've created a virtual space where kids come from different parts of the world to explore and really develop their ideas in fun and collaborative ways and working projects that they care about. So we did a pilot a few weeks ago, and then we are launching in June. And we're very excited about this, and I'm happy to be here. I also met Nick through David in New York City a few months ago. I'm happy to see you. And I will be monitoring the Q&A. So any questions you have, throw them in the chat.
Awesome. So for all of you who are interested in the work that Anna and I are doing together, I just threw a YouTube video in the chat. It's about 40 minutes long, and it dives into how we're thinking about building a summer camp for 9 to 11-year-olds and trying to just teach little kids how to be creative, just like we're teaching adults here how to write. And Nick, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we will get into your presentation.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick Maggiulli. I'm a data scientist at Ritholtz Wealth Management and the author behind of Dollars and Data. Background, I'm from California, live in New York City now. It's been kind of crazy quarantining here. I'm on day 64 of the quarantine in case anyone's keeping track. So that's about it though, but I'm here to just kind of talk about my writing process and that's about it. So do you want me to get into it, David, or what?
Yeah, Nick, why don't you share your screen? So as I mentioned, I'm going to interrupt Nick at certain times just to comment on certain things he's saying. And we will have some tangential conversations, and then I'll encourage Nick to interrupt me as I present. But Nick, why don't you talk about how you write?
Okay, thank you. And just let me know if this freezes up, David, so I can, go over something again. But first off, thank you for taking the time to be here. I know you guys, there's so many other things you can be doing, Netflix, there's a lot of competition for your attention. So I'm gonna just walk you through my writing process. Quick intro, as I said, I run of Dollars and Data. I published over 200,000 words online in the last 3 years, and I write about once a week. So I'm at 184 posts as of yesterday. So each one's about 1,000 words, some are longer, which is how I got to the 200,000 word figure. And lastly, I'm getting about 80,000 visitors monthly. I was at about 60, but it's kind of went up since coronavirus. So that's kind of why that's increased a little bit, because people are interested in finance and whatnot. But before we get into my writing, I want to talk about one of these. Now, maybe as a little kid, you guys saw this, maybe near a park or something. I'm wondering how many of you guys know what this is. This is an anthill. And for those of you that don't know, but an anthill leads into an ant nest. So within an ant nest, there's a bunch of different chambers. For example, there's a room where the queen's going to be, laying eggs. There's going to be a room where they have extra food. There's going to be a chamber for other things. And if I gave you the task of trying to design like the right way to build an ant nest, there's a bunch of different ways you could go about doing it. One way, which is very popular, is people will find an abandoned ant nest and then fill it with molten aluminum. And they will let that molten aluminum cool, and then they will chip away the dirt and soil around it, and you'll get something that kind of looks a little bit like that. See, they're chipping away the dirt there. And eventually, you get one of these. This is an ant nest cast. Right? There's one here. Here's another look here. So you could study these things. You could, make thousands of these from all the, ant nests around the world and come up with a theory of the right way to build an ant nest, right? You would say, okay, maybe one of your, one of the key points is, you need a sturdy material, you need soil, or you need dirt, something like that. It's going to work well, right? Next, you need to know that location-wise, you need to be secluded, but you also need to be near a food source. That's going to be an important point. And lastly, you're going to need to have some sort of good weather. If it's raining, your nest is going to flood, and so all the ants will die. So it's not good to be in an area that's really rainy. So if you were to just kind of come at a way to build an ant nest, this is what you might come up with. However, I would say, what about the army ants? This is also an ant nest here. This thing on the left, this big blob that you see right here. But this ant nest is actually made out of their bodies, and it's actually called a bivouac. That's how you pronounce this. And it's actually kind of cool because they can actually control the temperature and the humidity within this nest. And it's all created out of their bodies. They're always mobile. Army ants are always moving, right? And so that's one exception to the rule. Now, what about leaf cutters? They build their nests underground, but they don't have to care about where they are in terms of food source, because they just grab a bunch of leaves and they actually cultivate a fungus which they eat. And they are the only other species on the planet outside of humans that grow their own food. It's these leaf cutter ants, right? And then what about the weaver ants? They will actually go and take leaves, and you can see a bunch of weaver ants here pulling them together, and then they'll put a silk in between to make their nest. And I know this is kind of a ridiculous analogy. Nick, why are you telling me about ants? Who gives a crap? But you'll see that there is no right way to build an ant nest. You could go about the world, study the world, come up with one version of reality, and then you find all these exceptions that also work. And that is exactly true in writing. The same thing goes for writing. David and I, for example, are both good writers, but we are very different in how we write. David, his process is completely different than mine. Doesn't mean that his is right, mine's wrong. It's just saying that there are different ways. So that your key thing for you, my whole disclaimer over everything I'm about to tell you, is find the way that you write. I would say experiment with different things. Try this, try that, and find the way that works for you, because that's the most important thing, is finding your process. So with that being said, with that disclaimer, here is how I write. Here's my process. It's going to seem very simple, but I'll explain it as I go along. So the first thing, and I think the most important part of the funnel with writing, is consuming information, consuming high quality information. So I spend a lot of time reading. What that means, reading books, reading blog posts, reading tweets, watching shows, all sorts of stuff that are helping to feed my brain, to help me feed ideas. I just wrote a post recently, and I used something from Succession. So you can get it from shows, not just books and blog posts and articles and things like that, and academic articles. But you just want to consume a lot of information, because that's what's going to really allow, your brain's really good at making connections. And the more information you have in there, the more you're going to create these connections. That's how I came up with this ant analogy, whether you like it or not. It's trying to create these connections. The next part is that you have to think about that information. I know that seems really simple, but when I talk about thinking, I mean really critically thinking, because most of our day, me included, we spend most of our day on autopilot. We're just like, going through the motions of our day. It's very rare that even I am spending that much time critically deep thinking. I spend most of my day on autopilot. So you have to really break out of that habit and say, hey, wait, does that make sense? And spend that time thinking. So I kind of look at this as like a loop. You're consuming information and thinking. This is happening over and over and over. And once in a while, you'll be like, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting. Maybe there's something I can write about there. And so then you end up writing. That's the last part.
Nick, I have a question. I want to just jump in here. With consuming information, you wrote a great article about books and the kinds of books and the reasons why books tend to be higher quality sources of information. And you talked about the time per word that a given writer would spend to write a book versus a blog post. Now, that doesn't mean that every book is better than every blog post, but you talked about books like The Power Broker by Robert Caro. Talk about that philosophy of, like, as you think of what kind of information am I going to consume? I mean, are you consuming BuzzFeed? Are you just sort of scrolling on Instagram, or are you being more deliberate, or like maybe going to the third floor of the New York Public Library across the street from where you work? How do you actually think about finding information and sourcing the information that goes into your brain?
Yeah, so a lot of that is going to come through recommendations from people. So in terms of thinking about, like, why books are generally higher quality than blog posts, or generally higher quality than tweets, it's just the amount of time that people spend. If you think, and just because someone spent a lot of time on something doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be good. But at the same time, like, the more time that generally authors spend on something, and especially if it's been recommended by someone you trust. So if David recommends a book, I'm going to read it. He's like, hey, you should check this out. That's why I spent, 30 something hours to read The Power Broker, despite, it being 600,000 words, right? So I spent all that time because David recommended it, and it was a very good book. There are parts of it that I thought were, okay, this is not necessary, but it's still, like, there was tons of information there. If you want to understand how, the inner workings of, politics and power, that's the book to read, right? And so you want to think about, someone is taking all their time, because basically what you're doing when you buy a book is you're leveraging someone else's time. So Robert Caro spent 7 years on Power Broker, and I'm getting that for, $20. I'm getting, like, you think about how much and how many hours he spent to put that book together. I think I don't have the post here. I could look it up later. I should have this memorized, but he's working for like half a cent an hour for me. Like, I have the best writer in the world working for me for less than half a cent an hour,
Yeah,
That's
Nick, here's what you write. You say, for example, The Power Broker by Robert Caro took 7 years to write and can be purchased for $23.40 on Amazon. If you assume he worked full-time while writing it, then it would cost you less than 1/5 of a cent per hour of Caro's time.
Yeah, that's what's crazy. 1/5 of a cent for literally one of the greatest authors of all time to write you a book. Right? It's incredible. When you think of it that way, books are the most underpriced asset in the world. It's not even close. So that's kind of why I say consume information. Who do you trust? Like, this is why I use Twitter. Find those networks of people you trust, and kind of do that.
Yeah, real quick, one thing that I found for all of you is So I was talking to a friend the other day, and she's not a big reader. And she said, "Oh, the public library has all these great books." And I said, "What are the great books?" And she said, it has all the popular ones." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure that all the popular ones is all the great books." And I have a different philosophy on this. And I said to her, I think that the great books and the books that you should always buy are books that your friends and people that you trust strongly recommend, that you have never heard of or would never find in a bookstore. Those are the great books that are going to give you the ideas that other people look at and say, whoa, this person is really interesting. And there's a quote that I've always liked that goes something to the effect of, the originality of an idea is directly tied to the obscurity of the sources that that idea comes from. And so if you want people to read your writing and to say, whoa, I've never thought of that idea before, you're better off finding books like The Lessons of History by Will Durant, which you would never find in a bookstore, but is a 115-page compendium of this guy's life work as a historian. And if you're just posting and writing about just the popular books, the ones that you find 1 through 10 on the New York Times bestseller list, I'm not saying that those books are worthless, but I'm saying that if you're only reading those books, if you're only reading Washington Post, New York Times, USA Today, you're going to be getting the same information and working from the same Lego blocks as everybody else.
Yeah, that's a good point. You kind of want to have a little diversify your information streams in some way as well, just to see what else is out there. Okay, so continue on this talk. As I said, I consume information, think, then write. I would say I spend about 80% of my time in this part and only 20% of my time writing. So though we've talked about the 80% a lot, Dave and I just did, we're now going to talk about the 20%. So what does it actually look like? This is inside my WordPress right now. These are what I call my thoughts on hold. These are just a bunch of drafts. I'll go through this quickly. For example, this one here, Snake Eats Its Tail, that's about feedback loops. This one is about nature versus nurture. This one's about net worth and its limitation. This is actually coming out tomorrow. But this is just kind of how I organize my thoughts. And then even within one of these drafts, you'll see that I might put like ideas in here, kind of organize my notes. Okay, hey, I need to get this Michelle Obama quote. I need to get this Jack Bogle quote. Here's this DB research chart. I need a personal story from college about this. So I'll organize things like that. And then I will start writing. And so when I start writing, the goal is to what I call reduce friction. So when I'm writing, my process is, a lot of people say, oh, you write everything out at once and then go back and edit. I don't do that. I start at the very beginning. I try to get it perfect, and then I go to the next sentence and try to get that perfect and go on. So when I say friction, what I mean by friction is when the reader notices the writing instead of the message it's supposed to convey. That's how you know you have high friction writing, and high friction is bad. Now, let me give you an example. I don't really like having a lot of text on slides, but these next two slides will have a lot of text, and I'll explain why. Here's a high friction example. I'm going to read through this right now. This is some writing I found online. The most confusing part of the mobile transformation of shopping is that as people are more urban and otherwise isolated, they still need tribal feels. Even when we're competing for attention in real life and digital worlds, we need to link arms with social strategies to avoid real or perceived conflicts over status as a proxy for food and territory. So if we don't want to shop all the time, we still do want experiences. This, I've read this a lot, and it's very difficult to get through. There's friction, like what's going on, linking arms with social strategies. There's all these pieces in here that I have to like kind of rethink. What is this person trying to say? The message isn't perfectly clear to me. Maybe it is for you, but for me, it's really tough to figure out what this person's saying. Now, let me contrast this with a post that I wrote that I spent a lot of time on. I probably spent 3 hours on the next couple of sentences you're going to see. You're saying, well, Nick, you spent so much time on it. Well, this post did really well. And before it did well, I'm saying I spent a lot of time because I really wanted this idea to be clear, and I really wanted to kind of really wow people from the beginning. So now here's what I call a low friction example, which I'm hoping you find it's much easier to understand and follow. So I will now read this. In the late 1970s, the view in the publishing world was that an author should never produce more than 1 book a year. The thinking was that publishing more than 1 book a year would dilute the brand name of the author. However, this was a bit of a problem for Stephen King, who was writing books at a rate of 2 per year. Instead of slowing down, King decided to publish his additional works under the pen name of Richard Bachman. Over the next few years, every book King published sold millions, while Richard Bachman remained relatively unknown. King was a legend, Bachman a nobody. Now, why I think this has low friction is because the ideas are just logically connected in a very simple logical flow. So I'm now going to add just literal color in here into the main ideas that are in this, in these 3 paragraphs. So in red here, we have this, I call the view or the thinking or the status quo in publishing. So I say, there's this view in the publishing world. And then in the next sentence, I say the thinking. And then here I say, however, this was a problem. Like there's this is the first idea, the status quo in publishing. And then the second idea, which is the next logical piece, which we're going to jump to, which is Stephen King. I just say an author, and then eventually it's revealed that the author is Stephen King, right? And then by this sentence here, instead of slowing down, I've abandoned the first idea. It's gone. We don't need to think about it anymore. And now I'm introducing a new idea, Richard Bachman. So you can see there's idea 1 in red, idea 2 in blue, idea 3 in green. You can see this kind of like logical volley that's going on. So if I had to simplify this entire 3 paragraphs into like just bullet points, it would be this. There's a status quo in publishing. Stephen King is not okay with that status quo, so he creates Richard Bachman, right? That's it, that red, blue, green. That's exactly what your brain is doing when you're coming through this. You don't realize it, but your brain is it's just flowing right through, following the logic as it reads, compared to something where it's much harder to follow the logic. So as I said, you follow this logic through, creates Bachman. And then the last point, which this is what the whole post is about, King is successful, but Bachman isn't. But you're in your mind, you know Bachman is King. They're the same person. How is this possible? This post was called Why Winners Keep Winning. And it's really about how not all talented people become successful. And it shows that sometimes there's just a lot of luck involved, and that's what happens. But the main point here when I talk about low friction is that logical flow should go unnoticed. If you're putting out good writing, people should just be reading it and it should just flow. There should be no friction is what I call it. And that's the only word I have for it. Maybe someone else has called it something else, but I call it, no friction. It goes unnoticed. And this comes to another piece of philosophy, which is good writing is like good design. You shouldn't notice it. Now, what do I mean by that? Look at this door handle. Without me even saying anything, if you were walking through this door, you would already know. You need to push this door to go out. It's obvious. You don't even have to think about it. You would walk through it without even spending a second of your time to understand what's going on. But we've all been to a door handle where you pulled in, you actually needed to push. That's bad design. You don't want that. That's like something like this. This is not what you want. If you see a pull and there's something, this is clearly a push, this is bad. This is what bad writing feels like. This right here. This is what you're doing to your reader. Don't do this, right? That's my whole thing. Make the writing just clear. Don't try and be fancy. Don't need to use big words. Just make it clear. That's far more important. Get rid of the friction, right? And the last thing I want to say, the last thing is the last point, and then we'll wrap up here, is that the traditional writing advice we get in school is very bad because it doesn't focus on what's important in writing. This is us right here. How to be a good writer. Have an introductory paragraph. Make sure to use who versus whom correctly. Don't end your sentence in a preposition. And this is us. We're this scared little dog, and then we leave high school or college or whatever, and we go out into the world and have to write because we're taught that this is what matters, but none of this matters. This is wrong. Grammar, style, structure, none of that matters, right? You know what really matters? Entertain your reader or inform your reader or do both. This is what really matters, And you want proof of this? Go to Reddit right now. You'll find people getting upvoted that have no grammar, no style, no structure whatsoever. They're not even using periods. They're not using punctuation, whatever. And they can entertain you. They can inform you. You'll find stuff like that all the time. And then you read an academic paper that follows the Chicago Manual of Style down to the T, and you don't want to read it. This is what's going on. It's because people think this is good writing. This is not good writing. Good writing entertains and informs. That's it. Do one or the other. You either want to entertain them or inform them. Ideally, do both. So last slide here, this is basically it. I'm just summarizing everything I've said, kept this really short. Consume high quality information. Spend time thinking about that information. This is the hardest part. No one wants to do this. Even I don't do this. I find myself procrastinating all the time. I don't want to critically think about this, why my logical argument's not making sense, why this post isn't coming together, right? But that's the second part. And then you tell stories, use stories, use analogies. I mean, some of these analogies may have hit for you, some maybe didn't. But I'm risking it. You have to take the risk with the story. You have to make these crazy connections. That's how you come up with novel things that can impress people sometimes. Like, oh, wow, that was kind of cool, So you got to kind of go out there. Tell stories with logical flow. Keep it low friction. And lastly, your goal is to inform them. That's why you're writing to them, or entertain them, or do both. And lastly, the most important point, which is why we talked about the ants, there is no right process. So find something that works for you. So David, do you have anything you want to say about that? I kind of went through that quickly. I know we're kind of, a little strapped for time, so I don't want to.
No, that was fantastic. I have a couple questions. So if you want to stop
Yes.
sharing your screen and we can
Yes.
just chat. The first question that I have for you is, you and I have spent hours talking about stories at the beginning of articles. And I know that's something that you've worked a lot on, where I remember one time you even said to me, I have idea articles and I have story articles, that I have either the idea ready or the story ready. And when I have the idea ready, I need to find the story for that idea. And when I have the story ready, I need to find the idea for that story. Talk about that. And do you have like a way of collecting stories, and where have you taken inspiration from with stories, and how do you think about this?
So it varies. I've done a little bit less of the story type writing, because that's kind of like, to be honest, it's kind of like just doing what Morgan Housel does very well. And I could do it, decently okay, doing that type of methodology of always starting with the story, but I don't like always starting with a story, because at some point I just kind of got tired of doing it, because it's tough. It's tough to find a good story like, oh, this analogy fits perfectly for this idea. It's tough to do that. It's hard to find something that always works, So that's what I'm saying. That's me not doing my critical thinking. I'm procrastinating, to be honest. So, but how do you do it? You just gotta like read a lot. As I said, read a lot of stuff, write down stories. I use Kindle. I highlight a lot. That helps. So if you have something highlighted, you're like, hey, this is really useful. And then you come back to it later. I find that that's incredibly helpful for me. And then additionally, if I get an idea, I'm like, wow, that idea is really cool. Like, I just need to find a story. So I'll then start looking through a bunch of old stories I have in different books I use. But that's kind of it. I just kind of try and just have a collection of stories, collection of ideas. And maybe one day they kind of intersect, or one day it just clicks like, oh my gosh, that's it, But it takes time. You got to keep consuming information and keep thinking about it.
You work in the hub for financial blogging. What have you learned from spending as much time as you do with Josh Brown and Barry Ritholtz, Michael Batnick? What have you learned about watching them and what allows them to be so prolific?
Everyone's different. Everyone does it so differently. Like, Josh will go and he will literally sit at the computer and just hammer it out like that. Like, I don't do that. That can sometimes happen, but I'm never like, oh, this is it. Usually I've been thinking about this idea for maybe months or weeks. Maybe Josh has too, but he will literally sit down and then just rant this whole thing out and then publish. Like, he just does it right there. Just stream of consciousness. It might take him like an hour or 2 hours, not even that long, right? He'll just put it on there and get it out. Me, it would take me, 6 to 10 hours of thinking and writing and doing all this stuff. I'm more like a Beethoven. I'm trying to perfect it, versus he's more like a Mozart who just has it, right? It's just there, right? So I'm like at war with myself. He's not. So it's cool to see that. I think Michael Batnick's also like that as well. He just can just write it out. He very rarely needs edits. He's just like there with it. And so that's kind of interesting. But as I said, like, I'm not that. I can't do that yet. Maybe when I'm older and I've had more years doing this, I can just, oh, this is just like this and put it out there. But that's not me yet. I have to think a lot deeper about what I want to do and kind of figure out the arguments, and they can just do it much more just flowing, right? I think that's kind of the big thing. I think it's also the difference between speaking and writing. That's why I feel like I'm a very good writer, but just when I come up and I had to, if I had to go and you start asking me, rapid fire questions on things I'm not really prepared for, I'm not going to sound that eloquent compared to my writing, where I've had, hours and hours and hours to think about this and, oh, here's what this is wrong, here's why this is right, and massaging the argument, all that type of stuff. So I think that's the difference, because he speaks a lot. So he has to think like that. He has to be ready to go right away. So
Yeah. Speaking really makes you so much more eloquent. I once asked, when I got to interview Neil deGrasse Tyson, I asked him why he was such an eloquent speaker. Like, what is your secret? And he said, I almost never say anything in public that I haven't written down before.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So great advice.
Crazy, just crazy. And I mean, that shows how much, I think that here we're, just to put a stop on this, it shows how much, first of all, of writing happens away from the computer. And like, when I teach my writing students in Rite of Passage, this is a lot of what we talk about, that most of writing happens away from the computer. Writing isn't really this process of sitting, looking at a blank white page and just typing. Writing, as you said, like 80% of it happens away from the page and information consumption and thinking. And then I would also add talking, because you and I spend a lot of time at dinner. Like, when we go out to dinner, you and I talk a lot about what ideas are you thinking of? How are we going to frame this? I'm not so sure that you should frame it that way. Hey, David, you need a better intro story. And I remember even when I wrote What the Hell is Going On, I had my introduction buried within the piece, and you said, bring that right to the top. And I think that's part of the reason why that essay did well. And what you're saying here, and a lot of what I agree with, is that writing really is more that Josh Brown method, where you're doing all this stuff in your life. So by the time you sit down at your computer, you're just ready to rock, ready to fire.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
So I'm going to present now, and Nick, please interrupt me when you have something to add.
I will do.
So I'm going to start off talking about this idea of pushing and pulling. So I think that a lot of the times, when we think about, let's pretend we're getting a job, what we do is we push our ideas out there. Listen to me, listen to me. What do? We shout. We take our megaphone and we just throw a lot of information out into the world, and we just hope that somebody's going to listen. This is the canonical, like whenever I have people submit job applications, I'm astounded at the percentage of job applications which are horribly written. Like, people very clearly don't put in the time, and they just expect that if they put out 100 applications, 10% are going to respond, 3% will then become job offers, something like that. And that really isn't how writing online works. That's not really the benefit. Writing online is much more of a pull strategy. And I always say you want to become a lighthouse for like-minded people. And I love that idea. And what it means is that you're putting ideas out into the world. So in Nick's case, he's talking about dollars, which is money, and data. And he's doing it through the vehicle of writing. And so we're going to talk about this in a little while. But what ends up happening is Nick's not attracting people who are auditioning for Cirque du Soleil. Nick's not attracting people who are part of the Houston Astros pitching coach team. Nick's not attracting people who are musicians at Carnegie Hall. He's attracting people who are in the finance industry, who are asset managers. They might run hedge funds. They're writers. Those are the people who he's attracting. And what you realize when you put stuff out online is you realize that the world is so big. But what the internet is it's the world's best matching tool. Even though the internet is so big, the internet is so good at making the world small and matching you with the perfect person. It's like Tinder for ideas if Tinder actually worked. So I want to talk about Nick's story. And in 2016, Nick was in Boston, and he was working for a litigation consulting firm. And Nick, you want to tell this part of the story? I mean, you can do it better than I can.
Yeah, sure. So I was working for a litigation consulting firm, and I kind of wanted to, I'd always wanted to possibly start like a finance blog or something. And I was like, I've always had these ideas, but I never got around to doing it. I said, when should I do it? I always kind of wanted, maybe I should start this side hustle thing, whatever. I was like, how would I do it? And I finally just said, you know what, I'm going to do it. It was New Year's Eve, going into 2017. So late 2016, I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to write one post a week, and I'm going to have all my code published online for anyone to see. So that was like a big thing for me, because then I could actually organize my data and my code just like how I did my cases at the firm I was at the time, at that litigation consulting firm. So it was really more like making my own case, really. And every week was like a different analysis for the case. So I was kind of using what I knew and applying that to start writing. So that was kind of the big thing for me.
So Nick was where a lot of you might be right now, where he was working for this firm. He didn't love what he was doing, saw that he could make a career transition, saw a brighter future for himself. But when he looked up at his future, there was sort of like the ceiling, like he wasn't quite able to make the jump. So he saw that there was a whole world above the roof, but he looked up and that steel was above him, not letting him rise up. And on January 1st, 2017, for a New Year's resolution, Nick decided to start writing every single day. And that's exactly what he did. His first post was called Why Hedge Funds Get Rich, where he told the story about how they collect fees, and over time they become wealthier and wealthier. And over like 20 years, they become wealthier than their clients. And through those fees, that's how they get wealthy. And Nick was so excited to start writing. Boom, boom, boom. This might be how you feel. And he started, and crickets. He was in what I call the 4 months of quiet. And he published 16 posts before his first post that went well, Just Keep Buying, finally caught. But in that quiet moment, when he went X, 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 people weren't reading what he was saying. When he was getting X after X, he kept writing, and he didn't miss a single week. So he publishes that 16th article. And Nick, why don't you talk about what happened?
So yeah, Just Keep Buying was probably the first article that kind of went like, I don't want to, it's not viral because everything viral is relative, but I'm saying viral relative to what I was getting. It was like huge. It was like the biggest post I'd put out. I don't have the numbers now. I bet I could look back and try and find some of that data, but it was on Medium at the time. But like, it just was like crazy. All these people like, wow, this is so good, all this stuff. And it was just really crazy to kind of see that happen. And that's when I kind of knew like, okay, I think I can do this if I can just keep coming out with good stuff like this.
So Nick publishes Just Keep Buying, and he's saying, right, he's optimistic. But then after his first 4 months of quiet, he gets back into the return to quiet. And he just keeps writing, and he's focused. And what he did was Saturdays and Sundays, he would write. And this is one of the things that is most annoying about being friends with Nick, is that I can't hang out with him on Sundays because I get texts like this. He texts me so kindly, hey man, haven't heard of you in a while. And then I go, you're around Sunday? And Nick goes, yeah, might be around then, but maybe busy. It's my writing day. So get lost, David. But I should be able to do Saturday night. And this is a lot of my conversations with Nick. Nick has his writing day where he's not willing to work in a coffee shop and sort of hang out and kind of, talk and write. No, Nick is in his apartment. He sits at his desk and he works every single Sunday. And so even when friends are texting him, he's making a sacrifice to say, you know what? I am not ready to start going. And even now, as I look at this, and I'll get back into Nick's story, well, this is what his track record looks like. It looks a lot like this, where by the time that Nick got his first job offer from writing, you can see he hadn't missed a single week, not one. And what he had done was he had become a lighthouse for like-minded people. So what does that mean? Well, towards the end of 2017, remember Nick had started writing at the beginning of 2017. So this was 11 months later. Nick flew down to New York for a conference. And he was at this conference, and there he met Michael Batnick. And Nick, do you want to tell the story of how you looked up to Michael Batnick and what ended up happening from there?
Yeah, so it was kind of crazy. So actually, yeah, when I first saw them, it was actually like the night before. There was like some bar we were gonna go, like everyone's going to. So I go in there and I see Michael. I'm like, hey, I'm Nick Maggiulli, and he didn't know who. He was like, I'm sorry, who? I was like, I run of Dollars and Data. He's like, oh, I've read your work. He didn't realize, because I forgot at the time I was still anonymous. That's another thing I still talk about the story. I was actually so afraid of like putting my ideas out there. I was an anonymous profile. I wasn't even Nick Maggiulli. Like I was of Dollars and Data. Like, so as soon as I said of Dollars and Data, he knew who I was. But before that, like I was so disconnected. I forgot, oh, he doesn't even know because I'm anonymous. It's so silly, right? But anyways, at some point I became non-anonymous, but still it was so cool meeting him and like chatting and, getting to talk with him and stuff. And I was like, hey, do you guys hiring for someone in finance? What do you guys need? And then eventually from there, we got into talks related to my data work, not necessarily my writing, but more my data work and the stuff I did, which I was able to showcase on the blog. And that's kind of how I went through the next process with them.
So then, and I want to show this to you. I have two examples here because I want to show you just how often this happens in my life. So I have an example here with Nick and an example with my friend Tal. So you'll see on the left, I DM Nick and I say, hey man, love your writing. Are you in New York a lot? He said, thank you. I appreciate it. Love the piece you and Connor put out recently. We'll tweet it out soon. And this was the first interaction that Nick and I ever had. And he said, yeah, I'm not in New York too often. And then you'll see at the bottom, he messages me and he says, hey, good news. I'm moving to New York City in April. We'll probably live in Murray Hill or Southern Manhattan. I can fill you in on details later, but I think I really look forward to meeting you. So Nick and I ended up getting dinner at Wagamama, and you'll see on the right, like this is one of my messages with my friend Tal, where I'm just reaching out to people on Twitter and I'm saying, hey, let's chat, let's do direct messages. And this is, for me, how I meet a lot of my friends, but exactly what happened with Nick and I. So we meet up at Wagamama, we start talking, and Nick then moves down to New York because on June 1st, 2018, he starts a job down here. Nick, is there anything you want to add? And do you want to talk about how you got from meeting Michael to actually starting that first job?
So yeah, I basically met with them. We went back and forth. And it's actually kind of funny. While I was talking with Michael, another firm in the New York City area, actually someone slid into my DMs and was like, hey, do you work in finance, or would you work in finance? And I said, yeah, but I'm talking to this other firm. He's like, oh, we're good friends. Like, we'll work this out. And so basically, because they knew each other through Twitter and they were really close, I basically did a 2-month internship before June 1st. So from April, I remember I was in New York City in April. So from April and May, I was working somewhere else. And then I joined Ritholtz in June. But it was just all that came through Twitter. All of that was through Twitter, everyone knowing everyone. And I didn't even have to interview at that firm where I did the 2-month internship. Like, because Michael and Ritholtz had vetted me, like, they just said, okay, we trust them so much that, like, you can come work for us. Like, it was like, I didn't have to send a resume either. Like, I didn't have to do any of that stuff that the normal recruiting process required. Like, it was just all like, because I had put out my ideas enough and they kind of trusted my thinking process, I guess. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was like the side door for you. You know, there's a great book from a quote, or there's a quote from a great book called The Third Door. And the book begins and it goes, life, business, success, it's just like a nightclub. And at a nightclub, there's 3 ways to get into a nightclub. Most people wait in a long line right where you get into that front door. And whenever you walk past the nightclub, you see all those people standing there. And that's sort of what a resume is like. And then there's a second door, which is everyone knows about this door. It's sort of friends of the business, sort of friends of the nightclub. And you can walk right around and you can get through this sort of the VIP section. But what I always say that writing online is it's the third door. It is the door that nobody knows about, all the way in the back where there's no line. You skip past everybody and you get right in. And I think that Nick's story is that third door story applied to writing. And so I want to ask, what can we learn from Nick? And there are a couple things that I would focus on. And the first is what I call a personal monopoly. And his personal monopoly is right in the name of the website. It is of dollars and data. And so what Nick did when he was sitting in Boston, scratching his head saying, what am I going to do with my writing? I really want to do this, but I'm not entirely sure what I want to focus on. He said, okay, I'm going to start with dollars. I'm going to say, we're going to start with focusing on investing. Then I have, that's my interest. That's what I want to learn about. Then I have this skill in the software program called R. So I'm going to ladder that into data. So now what I have is I have investing and data. So I have 2 sets of interests, one overlap there, but I need a way to actually communicate that. And for him, it was writing. So what Nick did was he said, I'm going to focus on dollars and data through the vehicle of writing. But what's really important is Nick stayed inside of what I call his personal monopoly box. And what a personal monopoly box is it is inside that Venn diagram, you have unlimited freedom. You get to do whatever you want. You can write about travel. You can write about movies. You can write about food, whatever it is. But it should somehow cross the intersection of those 3 things. And when you first start writing, you're like, oh my goodness, this is going to be so constraining. But once you actually stay inside of it, you realize that this box is way bigger than you thought. It's not a 2-dimensional box. It's like a 3-dimensional box that can expand as the world changes. And it's almost like gas and how it flows, that whenever the world is changing, when things get tough, when things get easy, when the stock market rises, when the stock market falls, it begins to change. And depending on what's happening in the world, depending on what you're interested in, depending on what you're doing, that personal monopoly box can look different to you. But what's really important is Nick stayed inside his personal monopoly box. But that isn't enough. It wasn't enough that he just stayed inside of it. He also followed the Seinfeld strategy. And what the Seinfeld strategy is it comes from Jerry Seinfeld, you know, the famous comedian behind the show, you guessed it, Seinfeld. And one time he was at a comedy club and he's standing there and, you know, he's totally ready. This is his thing. This is what he does well. And a young comic, all nervous and stuff, goes up to him like Nick probably went up to Michael Batnick and he said, question for you, Mr. Seinfeld. Any tips for a young comic? His name was Brad Isaac. And Seinfeld looked at him and he sat back like this and he started thinking and he responded and he said the way to be a better comic was to create better jokes. And the way to create better jokes was to write every day. He told me to get a big wall calendar that has a whole year on one page and hang it on a prominent wall. The next step was to get a big red magic marker. He said for each day that I do my task of writing, I get to put a big red X over that day. After a few days, you'll have a chain. You'll keep at it and the chain will grow longer every day. You'll like seeing that chain, especially when you get a few weeks under your belt. Your only job is to not break the chain. So what Nick did was he didn't break the chain. He just kept on going. And what happened was he began to build an audience. And so, yes, his writing got better, but then his voice grew louder and louder. So even though some articles were successes and some were failures, and over time, more of them became successes, fewer of them became failures, he began to write on top of a stadium of people. And that stadium of people were people on his email list, people who signed up for every single Tuesday morning. I wake up and I'm telling you, I have a 100% open rate on Nick's email newsletter. I do not miss a single edition.
I checked, David.
There we go. I'm telling you, man, I've never not opened one. Me and thousands of other people. So even though some are getting better and some are succeeding, some aren't, Nick is on a pulpit and there's a whole stadium of people listening to him. And what Nick did was he focused on reps, reps, reps. So now on that, I have a story for you because I was reminded as I was making this of my experience focusing on reps, reps, reps. So I'll be honest, when I was a kid, I was really scrawny and I had no muscle. And it was awful because I was really skinny and I was short. So I was always bullied and I never liked it. And when I was in college, I went to a college called Elon. And I was like, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm done with this. And I had a friend, his name was Jamie Daffner. And Jamie Daffner loved to work out. And so Jamie used to drag me to the gym every single day. And he was the kind of guy who would bench press so much that like his waist would come off the bench press. Like, dude, you're putting up a lot of weight, but you are going to destroy your back if you keep doing this. But no matter what, he dragged me to the gym. And the rule that I made was I had to go to the gym every single day, no matter what. But I could only go for 30 minutes. And the second that the 30-minute timer went off, I could leave. That's all I needed to do. In fact, I needed to leave. And I made another deal with myself. If I put on my shoes, put on my shorts, put on my shirt, walked to the gym and still didn't feel like working out, I could leave immediately. But I never, ever, ever missed a single day at the gym. And I had my Seinfeld strategy X's. I would just go, and now I look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm just kidding. But this is exactly what, this is exactly what Arnold did. And he has this great quote that I think I learned from Nick, where he says, there are no shortcuts. Everything is reps, reps, reps. So what I did was I created all of these dots and I wanted to see what 184 reps look like. Nick has never missed a single week, not one. And this is what it looks like. Look at all of those X's. Actually, I'm just kidding. That's only half of them. This is what it looks like. I actually made this 3 times because I had to make the dots so small because Nick has written so many articles, and then I had to copy and paste 184 X's. So I learned firsthand what doing this is like. And this is what Nick was able to do. And so I think that if we're able to just step out and say, Nick, what is the key beyond, we see this 184 successful weeks. I think it's strategy and it's reps. So what Nick did was he had his personal monopoly where he focused on dollars, data, and writing, and then he put in the reps. And then because of that, he didn't have to shout into the world to advance and accelerate his career, to make friends, to meet all these cool people who are also interested in the same ideas as him. What he was able to do was become a lighthouse for like-minded people. So that is the kind of thing that we talk about in Rite of Passage, which is my writing course, which you might be interested in. And Nick has been a huge inspiration for that. So thanks, Nick. Now we can move on to the Q&A, but I'm curious to hear what kinds of comments do you have? Nick's video may have frozen, but this for all of you, this would be a good time to start sharing in the Q&A. Anna, actually, this would be a good time for you to talk about how your personal monopoly is developing, because I think that, this is something that you and I are talking a lot about. Basically, Anna and I, because we're working on summer camp, we're trying to figure these things out together. So Anna, why don't you share just how you feel right now? Because I think that a lot of people will relate with what you're going through.
Yeah, so I had a lot that I wanted to share before I joined Rite of Passage, but I just wasn't really sure how I wanted to do that or how I wanted to approach that. Again, I used to work at a school, and I attended actually to 10 different schools when I was growing up. Then I worked at 7 different schools. And in school, what they teach you is, well, you really need to be careful about the things that you're sharing and how you share it. And it has to go through a filter, and it's usually through the teacher. So, I finally left school last year, and I had all these ideas, and I was questioning all these things and I wanted to highlight common knowledge in education in a way that would start to provoke like a larger rumination about this important issues and matters. And when I took Rite of Passage, it kind of inspired me, and it showed me different ways in which I could really start sharing all this content. And it helped me nail down what it is that I wanted to focus on, and my voice and the way that I wanted to do it, and how to really build that audience. And that was November last year. And, by January this year, I already started building that audience. I had people reaching out and saying that the things that I was saying would resonate with them and the way that I was saying it. So really it's been, now it's May, and it's incredible the things that have happened and all the people that I've gotten to know and talk to, and all the ideas that are going around because of this and because of nailing that personal monopoly. And now what David's really helping me is to, what we've been talking about, really put in those reps and make sure that we're publishing constantly and putting our thoughts out there, which is not easy, right? Because again, we've been trained not really to do this in school. In school, it's kind of like it stays in the classroom. So yeah, that's what I'm working on now, and I've seen wonderful results so far.
Yeah. So, just to give you an idea of what Anna and I are trying to figure out, and I think a lot of you are trying to figure this stuff out, is we're just trying to see reps looks different for every individual person, right? You have people like Michael Lewis, who they publish book after book. That's not going to be me. Then you have people like me, I publish essay after essay. And Anna was saying, wait, it's hard for me to get my writing in these really long, organized essays. I need something different. So now what we're trying to figure out is can Anna publish something very small, like 100, 200 words every single day? And so I think that for all of you, one thing that I would strongly recommend, having taught hundreds of people to write, focus on what is the reps that work for me, and make sure that whatever that calendar that you have is, that you stick to it so that you get those green stars like Nick. Anna, anything else to say to that?
No, that's exactly it. You know, really find what's the best way for you to publish those ideas and put the content out there, because that's really what we should all be doing right now. And it's just a matter of finding your voice and your crowd and the best way that works for you in order to do that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm going to answer some questions in the chat. And Anna, if you could just moderate and let me know which ones are the best ones. I know that you were talking. Nick, question for you. How do you decide what to read in the consume information part? So let's focus a little bit deeper on that idea and how we choose what to read. So you do tend to prefer books to articles. You follow people on Twitter. What else do you do to find really high quality information?
I just a lot of it's from Twitter, just people recommending books, especially stuff that just seems random. Like one of the best books I ever read was called The Ends of the World. And it's about, I guess there's these 5 periods in history when like there was mass extinctions. Like, you guys have all heard the dinosaur asteroid one, that one. There's actually theories about whether it was an asteroid or it was an asteroid and all the things that happened after the volcanic. They think there's an asteroid that caused volcanic activity. So anyways, there's all these mass extinctions through history, and it was just like super interesting, like one of the most interesting things I've ever learned. And it's also about climate, and it's not really related to investing, but you can kind of think of like drawdowns, and you can kind of connect in different ways. But I just like reading about just interesting different stuff that's really cool. Like I just try to find books that people recommend. I use Amazon reviews, I use people, I kind of use a little bit of everything. It's like recommendations plus Amazon really gets me most of it.
What was that intro that you had? Like dinosaurs didn't exist or something? There was
the one, George Washington, or I guess when George Washington died, he didn't know about dinosaurs. Like dinosaurs, he didn't know about that dinosaurs existed, right? It's so crazy. Like George Washington was more likely to believe in giants than dinosaurs. Like that's just seems kind of ridiculous, But like dinosaurs are a very recent invention. We've only known about them for the last couple hundred years. So that's what's kind of interesting.
Yeah, one of the things for all of you that I would strongly recommend when it comes to consuming information. So one of the things that I think a lot about, and I haven't heard any other writing teacher mention anything close to this, and this works very well for me. Take a lot of notes so that you don't have to do research. And what I mean by that is when we write in school, we sit down on the first day of class and the teacher says, and I'm going to parody this a little, but the general point stands true. The teacher says, you have an essay due in 3 months at the end of the semester. Spend between now and then researching for that essay. You are going to write about something that you do not know about. And generally, that isn't how you want to be writing. What is better to be doing is to write about ideas where the whole idea is already kind of in your notes and in your head. And what I have is just a big note-taking system. And then when I read, it is always in purpose of something so that I'm focusing on something. So for example, next week, my whole week is devoted to redoing the rite of passage writing curriculum. So I am just flying through different writing books. And that's actually why I've been tweeting so much about writing. What I'm trying to do is put the main ideas out into the world and then watch how people interact and respond to them so that I can get feedback before I make it a concrete part of my curriculum. And what I'm doing is I'm probably flipping between 4 to 6 writing books right now. And I'll be honest, none of them are good. Not a single one is good. And I'm reading like the best writing books ever written. And I'm disappointed in all of them. And some of them are just absolute trash. And I'm trying to just figure out what is the difference between what makes something good and not good. And for me, like, I don't know what a preposition is. I don't know what a clause is. I don't know what the passive voice is. Like, I literally have no idea. And even as a writing teacher, I'm not interested in learning. Like, it's just not how my brain works. So the way that I'm consuming information is thinking in preparation for that. And I'm also writing an essay, my next really big long form essay called Why Work Went Wrong. And so I've been studying all the different people. And now this is a bit more of the school style, but I'm just reading in service of that. So I already have probably 70, 80% of the information, but I'm just trying to fill in the holes, right? I already have the brick. I just need to look for the mortar. So that's how I think of consuming information. I basically never just sit back and consume just for the enjoyment of it. With writing, I mean, I do it sometimes, but most of my consumption is still fairly purposeful. And that's what allows me to publish a couple 100,000 words every year. Anna, next question.
Yeah, there are a few questions about how you guys market your content and what are the best sites or sources that you use in order to distribute your writing.
Nick.
Yeah, so I mostly use my email. I think the most important, if I had to rank them, would be email list, then Twitter. I don't really have a Facebook, so I don't do that. And I've used LinkedIn, but like I don't even get that. I don't even know how many clicks I get. I can't even track that, but I know I'm not getting that many. So it's not even worth my time to even drop the link. I used to do that. I don't even drop the link in there anymore, but it's mostly Twitter and the email list. I think the email list is the most important because those are the people who are the most serious about it. They'll always see it. Twitter, sometimes people just miss tweets. Like I follow a lot of people on Twitter that I really like and respect, and I read all their stuff, but I still miss tweets. So it's like, just because, you know, you put something out there doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to see it, which is unfortunate. So that's it. And then once you kind of put out enough stuff out there, people just come back to your site. Like there's certain people I'm not on their email list. I don't see their tweets that often, but every so often I just go to their site to see what they're writing about. So it varies for me. That's kind of been my way. I am still trying to improve that though. So actually tomorrow, a funny story, I'm actually meeting with James Clear, and I'm going to ask him some questions like, hey, like what can I do to improve my email list to get should I be doing more marketing, kind of someone who's really succeeded in the space and trying to get more advice. I'm still trying to learn that myself, to be honest.
Nice. So. Yeah, he's such a good guy. I'm curious to hear what you learned from that.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be really helpful. He's really smart. For me, what I focus on is my email list. So that's just my bread and butter. Like nothing else really matters. I mean, I was actually just thinking today, like Twitter metrics are fun. And I have a Twitter course. If you want to learn about how I think about Twitter, it's an email course. And now I have a course on Teachable. That's a full online course of just pre-recorded videos. So with that email course, you'll learn just the basics of how I think about it. And what's great is people take that course, they come on the email list, and then I promote the email list a lot from Twitter because the Twitter following could disappear at any moment. Like it's a house of cards. And I think it's Naval Ravikant who said that building an audience on somebody else's platform is like building a castle out of sand on the beach, that a wave could come right up unexpected, and all of a sudden, all the hours that you've spent on that castle are gone. What's great about email is Nick owns his email list. I own my email list, and people get those emails. I have more than a 50% open rate for people who I send to. And email is the best place to build an audience, with some exceptions, and it's not even close. But I think the exceptions are like if you're making videos, if you're making podcasts and stuff. But if you're a writer, I would focus on email, and I haven't heard really any good counter arguments to it. Next question.
There's some other questions around personal monopoly and what if you have different interests, and if you can use writing to find your personal monopoly, and how would you do that? How would you approach that? So I'm thinking about the feedback loop in this.
Yeah, I'll answer this. So look, writing is, when you write, you don't just write about your personal monopoly. I would encourage you to think about that idea of having a personal monopoly, but writing will actually show you what you're interested in more than you ever thought. So when I first started writing, I never expected that I would be doing what I'm doing now. I think of a lot of writing as a dance. So when you dance, when you tango with somebody, you take the person's hand and two people work together in order to have a beautiful dance. And if person A isn't matching with person B, person A is just doing whatever they want, and they're moving too fast, moving too slow, doing stuff that requires too much flexibility, person B can't keep up with that. And writing is very similar. It's a dance between you and your audience. So you are the leader. You are person A, and you are grabbing your audience by the hand. You are turning on the music, and you are swinging with them. When it's time to twirl, you are leading that twirl, but you're making sure that your audience wants to do that. And what you'll see is also, as you write, as you dance, you're going to realize what kinds of dances you actually enjoy. So when you write, you're going to say, you know what, I'm bored with that topic. Like for me, I've always wanted to write like the ultimate guide to launching a product. but I write that post and I'm just bored with it. And there are people online who write these posts, and I'm so grateful to them for writing them. But I've learned that very matter-of-fact practical posts are kind of boring for me. I'm much more interested in working out ideas. Like, I think that a lot of the way that the modern work environment is right now is very hard on people. And I want to figure out, like, why? What is the history going from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to now? What is it about the modern workforce that is quite difficult? Why are people so obsessed with investment banking? Why are people so obsessed with management consulting coming out of top universities? Why are they so obsessed with Silicon Valley companies? Like, there's not anything wrong with that, but what about people building rockets, people building companies? Like, I want to figure out why we're not doing those things. So for me, those kinds of exploratory essays, you also see this in my Teal essay, right? Like, a lot of my personal monopoly is kind of this ineffable thing of me trying to figure out societal trends because I love observing the world. And I never knew that that was the case. I mean, I was a horrible writer growing up, horrible. When I was in college, I got terrible grades. I got a 2.3 GPA my freshman year spring. I literally didn't read a book until my junior year of college. All the stuff in elementary school, didn't read that stuff. Middle school, didn't read that stuff. High school, didn't read that stuff. It is so surprising to me that I've ended up here. So your personal monopoly will emerge, but keep it top of mind so that you can have some direction and an orientation point to guide yourself towards.
There's a question, there's several questions for Nick. They're the same question. How did you promote your writing in the early days and those periods of quiet? Like, what were some of the strategies that you used?
Yeah, so I've gotten better at this, but like, so some of this is a little cringy because when you have like nothing going, you're going to start cold emailing people. You're going to start, hey, check this article out. That's ways to do it. And that's what's tough. But like, there are certain people out there that just read everything. You know what impressed me most about my colleague / boss, Michael Bannock? He was in my first 20 followers. I have over 50,000 now. He was in my first 20. And when he started following me, he had like 20,000 followers. He was well known, but that early, he said, this guy, I like this stuff. He found me before anyone else did. So that blew me away. But it just goes to show, like, if you put your stuff out there, tweet at people, do this, get into people's DMs. Hey, would you read this? If they don't respond, that's fine. But some of them will. Someone will say, hey, and if you ask for feedback, they'll give you feedback, all sorts of stuff. That's kind of what I did. I don't do that now, obviously, but like when I first was starting, I was just trying to put things out there, see what would stick. And so it's going to be tough early on. It really is. It's the hardest part. Like if I had to do it again, I maybe wouldn't have done it. I don't know. I debate because it's like, it's all in your head. You're all in your head. That's it. It's like if you can deal with like just getting constantly rejected for like, a while. I mean, it could take, I got lucky. I think I got very lucky. It only took me about 9 months before I started feeling really confident, but I think there's people that can be writing for years before they start really seeing some turnaround, and so I can't even imagine that. I hope that answered that. If not, but yeah, I'm starting to type in answers for certain people that just ask me questions. I was doing that as well. So let me go through some of these. What are your thoughts on writing? And honestly, I've talked about that, Stephen. Basically, just like I think it's great. I think it's a great way to start if you're especially like worried about like people judging you. Just go anonymous. That's what I did. Should you market rather than tweeting? We talked about that already. Do I tailor my content to social media? I don't know. Probably not. So, I'm sorry, Anna. Do you want to start?
No, there was a question for both of you regarding reading. How do you schedule your reading and how much reading do you do in terms of like reading and writing and that balance?
David?
Yeah, I probably spend more time writing than I do reading. I mean, I spend way more time creating than I do consuming. Like I don't have any scheduled reading time. I probably only really get to reading like at a decent amount, like 3 or 4 days a week. But when I read, I usually read right before bed and I'll read for a while. Like I'll do like 4-hour reading sprints, but like today I haven't read anything. Tomorrow I'm pretty busy, won't read anything. Like for me, the key is that I have a note-taking system and I also just try to do super interesting things that are worth writing about. Like I always think about how can I be interesting to myself? Because if I can be interesting to myself, then I'll be interesting to other people. So my tolerance for boredom is very low. Like if I'm bored, peace out, bye, thank you, next. Like I just leave. And so for me, when it comes to reading and writing, I just, do it whenever I can and just try to say, how many things can I actually do with my life that are higher than my already very low bar for boredom. I just get bored so easily. So if something entertains me, it's going to be interesting. And then I get to write about those interesting experiences, which I actually think is a big help. So I think that too often we think of reading and as you consume things and then you produce things, right? It's like you eat food and then you turn them into nutrients and then you get stronger and stuff. And that's not really the case. I would think much more of an interplay of how do I read interesting stuff, consume interesting things, and live an interesting life. And both consuming interesting things and living an interesting life create the forcing function for good ideas and good writing.
Okay, there are three questions that are the same about how do you guys give credit when credit is due, and someone's saying that they feel kind of like scared to go back to the original sources, and they have a great feel of plagiarism. So many ideas are not like whenever. How do you paraphrase, or how do you give credit to people, or how do you source the different things that are not necessarily yours?
I just straight up just be like, hey, this idea came from this, or as this person said in this book. I don't have any fear of that at all. Even if it's like I might have a similar idea that's just a little variation on it. I might just take an idea that's old and just vary it. Like, for example, I had this post called Avoid the Zeros, which is about not necessarily like trying to be the best and be optimal, but just avoid all the bad behaviors. And that's like Via Negativa from Taleb. So many people have written about that. That's not a new idea. I just called it Avoid the Zeros. I literally just renamed it, rebranded an old idea. And I think that is writing. I mean, that is effective writing. Rebranding old ideas, I think, works.
Yeah, the amount of information that you consume that is rooted in some new original idea basically rounds to zero. Basically, everything that you write or everything that you read and everything that you write is going to be from other stuff. Like, that is part of it. That's what we do as humans. But, there was a essay that a lot of libertarians like to cite called I, Pencil from 1945. And the whole point of the essay was that no one can make a pencil. Like, there's not a single person on earth who knows how to dig out graphite, who knows how to sell that pencil, who knows how to write like the beautiful little Dixon Ticonderoga green on a pencil, who also knows how to make the eraser, who also knows how to make, I'm looking for my pencil, who also knows how to make like this green stuff here, who also knows how to have the lead, who also knows how to get the oil that's required to do all this, who also knows how to make the trucks that ship the pencil to me. Like, that is how the world works. Like, it is a collaborative process where we're all helping each other to work things out. And when you are committed to saying, you know what, this idea is going to be 100% original, you're basically saying, I'm not going to benefit from all the people who have lived before me. Now, when you make a pencil, you don't have to credit every single person. You credit them by buying the graphite or the lead that's needed to actually produce the pencil. In writing, of course, you credit those people. But school, like, really instills this, like, do not borrow from other people mentality. And it hurts us as writers because then we're afraid to build on top of other people, when what's arrogant is to say that you're going to just have all of these brilliant ideas on your own, and you're not going to take all the knowledge that you've put into your mind and kind of synthesize it and repackage it like Nick did with Avoid All Zeros. And provided that you're crediting people properly, you're thanking them, you're building upon other people's work, that is what the pursuit of knowledge is. That is the story of humanity. We stand on the shoulders of people who have come before us. And when you refuse to do that, you are not taking part in the human march towards more and more knowledge and more progress.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that.
Sorry, I was muted. How do you decide if a topic or an article series should be turned into a book?
I have no idea. I've never written a book.
I was going to say the same thing. I haven't written a book either, so I'm like, not the right people, I guess. But I think if you have something that's like really deep and you're like, I could write 10, 20 blog posts on this, that's it. But I just haven't found that yet. I don't know if I'll probably never write a book, to be honest, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, I've been thinking a lot about this because I might write a book about rite of passage. And what I would say when you write a book is when you have a book is when you have knowledge that has been so distilled and so well thought out that you're ready to put it out into the world, and you're ready to say that this is worth people thinking about for at least the next decade without me changing anything. So a book has to be timeless, it has to be well thought out, and it has to be something that, like a blog form factor, isn't worth doing. Now, there also are books as business cards, and that's sort of a different story, but that's not why I would ever want to write a book. I want to write a book so that my grandchildren's grandchildren can read that book and say, this is still interesting. I feel like that's when you write a book. That's what a book is. Like, I was talking to Morgan Housel this week, and he said, we were talking about the long tail on his book. And that's what he said his goal was. He said he wants his book to have a long tail, meaning he wants his book to continue to sell for years and years and years. And if that's not what you're ready to do, don't write a book, have a blog.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I kind of like blogging, because that's what I'm saying. If I put a post out there and it doesn't do well, I just move on and go to the next one. Like a lot of my posts, I don't consider them success and failure. Everything is a degree. It's not 1 or 0. It's like, oh, this was more successful than this. Even like a bad post today will still get more views than one of my best posts like 3 years ago, right? So it's like, it's not really true that like quality always matters. I mean, it does, but like at some point in the future, I'm guessing my average post will get even more views than like a good post I get now, right? But who knows? Like just taking it a day at a time.
Anna, let's do one more question.
Yeah, I've been answering some. I've been trying to type some if they're like related to me or something I think could help. But yeah, what other ones should we do, Anna?
There's a good one that I can't find now, but it was about how do you think about an idea? When you have an idea, like how do you go from that idea into writing? If you could give an example of your process.
Yeah, so I would think of it like a cubist painting. So what the cubists tried to do is, before the cubists, like if you look at the history of painting, right? Like take a Rembrandt portrait. What a Rembrandt portrait is it's a very good representation. Rembrandt was painting portraits of people in Holland, and he was there in like the 15th and 16th century, and it was all about realism. And you know, even with Monet, I was at the Met a couple months ago, and I was looking at Monet's early paintings from like 1860, and this was right around the invention of the camera. And his early paintings are basically realistic. So he's painting what the Mediterranean looked like from the eye. And then as we got into the late 19th century, we had the camera. And what the camera did was it took out realism. It said realism isn't important anymore, and we're going to start painting our representation of what the world looks like. So that's how you get the famous Monet water lilies that have this sort of like technicolor glow in Monet Love Gardens, so love flowers and stuff like that. That's also how you get the Van Gogh swirls that we all love, right? That was Van Gogh's crazy mind, him painting not what he saw really, but how he felt about what he saw. And what happened was what the Cubists tried to do, and this is where I'm getting into in terms of how I think about writing. What the Cubists tried to do, sort of beginning with Picasso, was say, how do we take, and then Cezanne, how do we take a two-dimensional page and then represent it in a three-dimensional way? So that's what I try to do with writing. I try to take a certain idea and then begin to look at it from all these different angles. I try to look at it from the bottom, try to look at it from the sides, from up top. How do I do that? Well, I will look at all these different perspectives. So I'm writing this essay called Why Work Went Wrong. So I'm trying to get a different perspective. So I'm going down the Marxist canon. Like, I've never read Marx. I know economics fairly well, but the classical economists generally discard his ideas. And also what I'm doing is I'm starting to talk to people. So almost everyone I talk to, I talk about this essay. So then what I begin to understand is, how are people culturally perceiving this idea? And then what do I need to do to explain this idea in a way that is simple, logical, memorable, and easy to understand? And through conversations, I then get good at working out the idea so that by the time that I sit down at the page, I've done my cubist painting of seeing it from all these different angles, and I can actually just write. Nick, how do you do it? Besides our dinner conversations, always with steak in front of us.
How do I do what? I'm sorry. What I was answering some questions.
How do you think of new ideas?
As I said, I just read a lot and things just like connect.
How do you work through new ideas? So like once you have an idea and you're ready to write, how do you think about how you're going to structure that thing? Do you just sort of stay in your room? I know you and I talk
pieces out, and I just start thinking about how would I imagine myself giving a speech almost like, okay, if I was going to say this in front of a room of people, what would I say? I would start with this and then go to this and then go to this and then go to this. And I know I have an idea of like, okay, these couple of points I want to hit. May not know the order yet, but it'll be like, oh, this flows to this. I'll just know it. Like it just know when it feels right. I know that. So yeah. So Anna, any other questions? I see we're getting some more questions even coming. How do you get over writer's block? That's a great question. Writer's block. If you have writer's block, it means the idea is probably not that good yet. You haven't spent enough time thinking about it yet. And trust me, I've had writer's block. I'm like, how do I want to say this? And sometimes I kind of just like, maybe I kind of just put it together and it doesn't work out as well. And maybe those posts aren't as good. But the ones that, and Morgan Housel said the same thing. The posts that just like, once you've like thought it all out up here and they just come out, those ones are generally going to do better than the ones that you have to struggle with. I find if I have to struggle really hard, the idea is not that good. If the idea is really good, it just writes itself. It's like, oh my God, this is so obvious, So.
Yeah. I was talking to Alex Danko, who's another phenomenal writer, and he said something very similar. He said that most of his best articles are what Derek Sivers calls obvious to you, amazing to others. So for him, they're common sense. They're intuitive for him. But then other people read them, they're like, whoa, how did you come up with that? And Alex always says that his best articles are just dead on simple. He knows exactly what to write. And even I was talking to Anna a couple weeks ago and I came up with this article called Teaching Like a State. And I just had this mental tapestry of different ideas. And I said, boom, I got the idea. Like it just popped into my brain. And then the whole article can kind of come in. And then what I just do is I just talk to a couple people. And for me, it's always just talking and just trying to work it out. So I think what's interesting is Nick imagines that he's going to do a speech. I try to talk to people, which is basically like a one-on-one speech. And through that, we then find the structure. But I think that's a great place to close. And I want to thank you all for joining us tonight and for being here. And you can follow Nick at Dollars and Data. You can follow Anna on her website, which will be in the description on YouTube. We've thrown it in the chat. You can follow me on Twitter, on my website. And any questions, let us know on Twitter.
Yeah, feel free to DM me. If you guys, Dollars and Data, if you guys have questions or I didn't answer, I tried to answer a lot of these just for the ones kind of directed to me. If I didn't answer your question, please just DM me. I will definitely chat with you guys about that. So I hope I answered as many as I could. But thank you guys. Thanks for coming out.
Fantastic, everybody. Thank you very much.